Hello everyone, Sarah here with the Station Library at MCAS Cherry Point, and today we are coming to you to talk about ancient warriors and soldiers. And the reason we're doing this short clip with you today is because one of your activity kits for kids this summer is to stop in and grab and create your very own terracotta soldier. And we'll talk about terracotta soldiers in just a minute, but I wanted to show you what you get in your kit. So if you stop into the library this week, you'll be able to pick up a very simple paper bag, and in that paper bag will be 6 ounces of clay, and from this clay you will or can use our directions, which come with even a building guide, to create your very own soldier. And you'll be able to model it after terracotta soldiers or any kind of ancient soldier that we talk about here, or go crazy and make your own. So historians have found records and indicators of warriors and soldiers present in societies as far back as 10,000 years ago. Guys, that's a long time. Certainly longer than the United States has even been a blip on the radar. So clearly, warriors and soldiers have been a huge part of history, and in fact have even helped to control and develop their civilizations and steered the direction where some of them went. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But the role of a warrior would often come with higher social status, which means that a warrior in a certain grouping might have more wealth, they might have more respect, they might have more property, and they might have more power within their government system because they had proven themselves on the battlefield. So you'll even find that leaders often started out as warriors, and they fought their way up and they proved their worth, and their leadership was earned on the reputation of their battles. So that certainly would take a society in a different direction if a warrior was a leader versus, a philosopher, right? So different cultures even develop distinct types of warriors based on, lots of different things like their needs or their enemies or their environment and their lifestyles. So can you take a second and think of a warrior that maybe you know from history, or a type of warrior that you've heard about? What about this one? Well, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Certainly inspired by famous warriors through history, one of which we'll talk about in just a few minutes, but maybe not the actual group we should focus on for our quick little chat, though I do like them. And we do have their movies here at the library in case you were worried. Now, this warrior, so this is one of the most famous, most powerful warriors in history. This is a soldier of Sparta. And you can see that he wears very little protective gear. And the only thing missing in this picture is his cape and a big shield that he and his fellow warriors would form a formation with and fight with. Now, Sparta was a city-state in ancient Greece a long time ago, around 650 BCE, which is before the Common Era, which is the time period that we're in now, the zeros to the 2020s. So a long, long time ago. And this is just going to blow your mind. Spartan men were required to stay fit and ready to fight until the age of 60. Now, think of someone you know who could be close to 60, maybe a neighbor or a grandparent or a parent. 60 years old is a big ask to say, hey, come on out and fight with us on the battlefield and stand next to this 22-year-old who's super, super strong. So they had to work really hard to maintain their battle-ready status through the age of 60. And to help with that, the people of Sparta, including men, women, and children, focused on very simple living, and the entirety of their education was focused on military skills and battle strategy. The boys began training for the military by age 7, and interesting fact, Sparta was one of the only city-states at the time to educate women too. So women were expected to go to school and to maintain physical fitness, and were not married until they were 18 or older, which was very revolutionary for the time. So Sparta really focused on being the healthiest and most battle-ready they could be. One of the things that has stayed from the Spartan influence is the term Spartan. We use that to describe something simple or without comfort, like if you went into a room and the room had a chair and a table and that's it, that would be something that was Spartan because it lacked the comforts that you might expect from, say, a hotel room or something. Speaking of long-lasting influence, let me introduce you to our next famous warrior, the samurai of Japan. Now you'll notice in this picture that our samurai is wearing a lot more armor than our Spartan friends from before, but look at the time period in which he lived. A samurai lived between 10th century and the 19th century, and we're just in the 21st century now, so they certainly had access to a lot more sophisticated types of production and materials that wouldn't necessarily be in their natural environment, like Spartans had to make do with way a long time ago. Now what's interesting is that the word samurai doesn't mean anything related to swords or battle or weapons at all. It means attendant. And before they became a fierce warrior grouping, the samurai really were just attendants to a lord, and over time grew into their soldier group or their defenders. To become a samurai, you had to start training around the age of 10, which again is not as bad as our Spartan friends at age 7, but certainly earlier than I would like to start training to be anything. Now if you look again at this picture, you'll see that the sword is highlighted, but the most prized skills of a samurai were not swordsmanship. First, it was horsemanship and archery, and in fact, most battles fought by samurai were from atop a horse with a bow and arrow, and the sword came last. So swordsmanship and samurai, though they're intrinsically linked in our popular cultures of movies and TV and books, didn't really develop until later in their heyday. The final thing that's most infamous about samurai is their moral code. So the Bushido, or their code of honor, is supposedly something that all samurai lived by through time, but it wasn't actually written down until the 17th century, the 1600s, so a lot of historians aren't sure if samurai of, say, the 11th century lived by the same moral code that made samurai so famous in later centuries. So, as for me, I like the idea of a warrior group being led by a moral code, so I'm going to say that they were, even though they can't actually be proven. You'll likely recognize our next famous warrior, the Mongol horseman from Mongolia, from the live-action and animated versions of Mulan. But I want to remind everybody that movies that are inspired by history are very rarely factual. So if you'd like to learn more about Mongol horsemen, I recommend you do it outside of your TV screen. But for now, take a look at this warrior's armor. Now it looks very similar in style and production to our Japanese samurai. And look at the time period in which they lived. Mongol horsemen were most prevalent between the 13th and 14th centuries. So they would have overlapped with our samurai soldiers, which means that they would have access to similar materials and production types. Now, these Mongol horsemen are called horsemen because they were, in fact, some of the greatest horse riders in the world, and still are. Mongol horsemen were brilliant at battle strategy, they were fierce warriors, and they could adapt to any type of environment. They were so impressive. Now, the most impressive thing I think about Mongolian troops is that they were incredibly forward-thinking, and they would go up against an opponent, and they would take battle strategies and tactics that they liked from their opponent and turn them into their own practice. So then when they went up against a new foe, they'd introduce things and battle strategies that might not have ever been seen by their next opponent and would be incredibly unexpected. They were just brilliant. Their best weapon was a composite bow, which makes sense when you think about how most of their battle experience is from atop a horse. So they could shoot an arrow twice as far as their opponents with this composite bow, and they often didn't even have to clash really up close because they could shoot from far away. one of the most famous Mongol horsemen was Genghis Khan. And he, like we talked about in our first slide, was a warrior that worked his way to be a leader. And he was ruthless and brilliant. Our last warrior group is not famous for battle skills or even for being alive, but these ancient warriors are famous solely for the reason that they are both made out of clay and survived more than 2,000 years of nature's wear and tear before being rediscovered. These are the terracotta soldiers of ancient China. Now, these soldiers were built approximately 250 BCE, which is after our Spartan friends, but well before any of our other famous warriors and soldiers. They were commissioned by the very first emperor of China, whose name was Qin Shi Huang, and he commissioned them when he was just a teenager for the sole purpose of protecting him in the afterlife. So they took almost 40 years to be made, and so far, historians have found 80 different artisan marks on their different pieces. So more than 80 artists helped create them. Now, these realistic figures are so cool because they provide a unique insight into what ancient Chinese warfare was like and what the different levels of service members were. So one of the cool things about these physical soldiers is that the higher in rank they are, the taller they are. And though most of the pieces were made from forms and patterns, there are individual, unique pieces to each of the 7,000 soldiers. So maybe their ears are different, or their hair is different, or their nose is a different shape. It is an astounding thing to see in person. I was lucky enough to see some of them in a traveling show in Richmond, Virginia. So I've seen them in person, and they are just incredible to see. Now, clearly at some point, the figures had been lacquered and colored, and so were vibrantly colored, but that has faded and disappeared through time. And we're so fortunate that they were discovered when local residents were digging for a well and found some broken pieces of pottery and thought, hey, that might be useful, and kept digging. And so then they slowly began to uncover actual full figures of these ancient Chinese warriors. So, what we're asking you to do, my friends, is not nearly as intricate as what you see here, but we do encourage you to use your clay and the building guide that we provided for you to create your own ancient warrior or soldier. You can do it as closely to our ancient friends that we've talked about or as modern as you like. Maybe you have a soldier that you want to honor with this clay figure on your own. So you can do whatever you want to do. You can deviate, no problem, but we would love to see your creation. So send us a message on Facebook. We are part of MCCS Cherry Point, or comment on our post with your image. We look forward to seeing them. Have a happy summer, and we hope you're doing our summer reading program. See you next time.